Hello, I hope you're doing well today. My name is Ian Green, and I'm the musician for Music Dreams and also for Ian J. Green, two different artist profiles you can find wherever you stream your music. And today I'm going to be discussing part 2 of Unit 9, which is related to the topic of intervals. And the material I'm going to be covering is on page 40 in the really great book called Intermediate Elementary Music Rudiments by Mark Sarnecki. Now, these specific units that I've outlined on this channel are more of a way to organize all the different topics. The book itself does not have different unit numbers, but I just wanted to organize things into an easy and manageable way so that when you're doing your studying or you're referencing various things, it's easy to find the different ideas. Now let's go over to a shared screen and we will discuss what a minor interval is and also an augmented and diminished interval as well too. Now, in part 1 of this series on intervals, we talked about how to find the space between two in notes, which is an interval, and also how a melodic interval and a harmonic interval are basically the same sound, but played two different ways. A melodic interval is played by having one note played and then the next note is played separately, and a harmonic interval is when you have two notes played at the same time. We also talked about how the perfect and major intervals are the different types of intervals that are used in a major scale. Now, in order to create a minor interval, what you want to do is still, of course, find the space between the two notes that you'll be writing, but then a minor interval is always one semitone smaller than a major interval. So, for example, if we want to create a major third on C, 1, 2, 3, we would go to E. But if you want to create a minor third, you would still use the note E, but we would add an E flat to lower that specific top note. In this specific example, from a natural E to a E flat, the interval is changed by adding a flat to that group of notes. But sometimes you can have a major interval that changes, let's say, from a sharp to a natural sign as well. It just depends on the context or on the scale that the interval is based on. But the basic idea of a minor interval is that a minor interval is always one semitone or one half step smaller than its major counterpart or major interval. Now, how do you find a major interval, you might be asking? So what you want to do is always think about starting from the bottom note and think of the scale that's related to that bottom note. Then what you can do is count up to find the specific answer of the top note, let's say a major sixth above C. Starting on C, counting up 6 notes, you would land on A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But then if you wanted to write a minor interval, a minor sixth, you would use that same A, but put an A flat to make that interval a half step smaller. Now, something that's interesting is that you can also create an augmented interval. An augmented interval is always one half step larger than a perfect interval, or it's also one half step larger than a major interval. So if, let's say, we have a perfect fifth from C up to G. If you want to create an augmented fifth, we would write C to G sharp because we're taking that space between those two specific note names and making it a half step larger. And let's say we want to do a major third above C to E. But if you go up a half step, we would go from C to E sharp. Now, a diminished interval is one half step smaller than a perfect interval or a half step smaller than a minor interval. Same principle as augmented intervals, except now opposite, smaller. So let's say we want to start on F, and we want to play a perfect fifth above F. That would be F to C. But if we want to have a diminished fifth, we would go from F to C flat because we have to lower that top note down a half step. So probably the most important thing to think about when creating an interval is first to know what the size is and what is the basic interval name. So for perfect intervals versus major intervals, you want to know that really well. Then, if you need to find minor intervals or augmented or diminished intervals, you can find those intervals next. So let's say you wanted to find a perfect fifth. You could just go through, count up, and you're good to go. But if you want to find a diminished fifth, first what you have to do is find the perfect fifth and then lower it a half step to make it diminished. In another tutorial, what I will do is work on a couple of different questions to help describe this with working on some of the homework on one of the pages in this book. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, bye for now.